The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Mike, and today I'm going to be showing you how to use the Hazard and Risk Register within Air Maestro. To start, you will find the Hazard and Risk Register using the main navigation bar on the left. You can open that up, go to Safety, and then click on Hazard and Risk Register. Before I delve into the details of what this does, I'll give you a brief overview of what the purpose of it is. As I'm sure most of you are already aware, the safety reporting is a form of reactive risk management, which means that something has happened or something has been identified, it has been reported and therefore gets dealt with. The Hazard and Risk Register is proactive risk management, which means that you have identified a risk and you have put measures in place known as controls to prevent that from happening. I'll go into a bit more detail on what that means later on and how to manage that. To start with, we have on the left-hand side a list of hazard areas. These are in grey. Beneath each hazard area, you can have another hazard area to further subdivide. And then you will find in black the actual hazards themselves. Each hazard can have several risks associated with it, and I'll show you more on that shortly. You can filter to see only a certain hazard area. You can reset your filters here, and we have some controls on the right hand side that say new hazard area if you want to customize this, new hazard, which would bring up one of these, and new risk, which goes under a hazard. We also have a task register, which is for management of change, and I'll show you how that works shortly. Now, before we dive into this too much, I'm going to go out and go to Site Settings and show you that there is a Hazard and Risk Register set up here. If we open that up, we'll see some customizable fields, including two checkboxes at the top. Enable risk levels to be set per action. When you generate an action from a hazard or a task, you can choose to set a risk level if you have that enabled. You can also choose to hide the header in the hazard printout, which I'll show you later. Below that, we have set risk priority level settings. I'll show you where that is used later on. You can customize them by adding a new entry here, deleting an old entry, or changing an old entry. Note that if you change an old entry, anything that has been, in this case, selected as a low priority will change to reflect the new text. Cancel that. Below that, we have a risk equipment register. You can associate equipment that your company uses with a risk, and here's where you can add or manage those entries. You can see that only these three have delete marks or delete buttons next to them. That is because they have not been associated with the risk and therefore can be deleted without breaking anything. And then finally we have adequacy of existing control ratings. And again, you can add new ratings, edit, or delete. On the right-hand side, we have a list of audit hazard areas. Now, the reason it says audit here is because these hazard areas are tied to the audit setup. If you'd like more information on that, please see our other webinar from July of 2019 covering auditing. You'll see we have a tooltip here. These can be dragged and dropped around. The actual hazards themselves are listed in blue, and you'll see that some of these are in grey, meaning that they have been deactivated. The philosophy behind Air Maestro is that you will never be able to delete anything that holds a record. So all of these are old things that have been done in our demonstration site. They're no longer being used. We've moved on to a new format, but all of the previous work that has gone into it has not been removed from the system. It's still there if you wish to find it. Okay, one more thing before we delve into the hazard risk register is this risk matrix here. This allows you to customize the risk matrix along with the descriptions of each risk band, each consequences band, and each likelihood band. These are not very good on a demonstration site because they are not very specific. This one's okay, I suppose. But if we go to improbable, heard of incident in the aircraft industry does not mean very much. It should be quantifiable. So one incidence a year, for example. Okay. Now we can go and open the hazard and risk register again. And we'll talk a little bit about the taxonomy. Unfortunately, this is not a very easy thing to talk about because there's no real right or wrong way to do it. What you do is entirely up to you, and I've included a couple of examples here to help you think about that. So under point 2, flight operations, I've divided it into various aspects of the flight, facilities, and then aircraft preparation, and then actually flying the aircraft, and destinations. So under destinations, I've included a hazard for one of the aerodromes that we fly at, and underneath that hazard, because operating at an aerodrome is hazardous, we then have specific risks associated with that aerodrome. We can click on that and see some of the details. We have wind shear. The risk is an unstable approach. That would be caused by wind shear. It's a medium risk because it happens occasionally, but the consequences are minor. I'm going to come back to that shortly, and I'll show you how to manage all of these tabs. Another example I have for you is down here under maintenance, where we've used the shell model. Software, hardware, environment, and liveware. I think we swapped those two around, unfortunately. How you do this is entirely up to you. It's not an easy thing to decide because there are a lot of hazards and risks that we deal with in the aviation environment. We at Cairn Aviation are available to help and discuss it with you and decide on the most effective implementation of the hazard and risk register present in Air Maestro. Okay, so some basic controls here. We have these two buttons, the minus and the plus sign. The minus will collapse all of the trees underneath this hazard, and the plus sign will expand everything. I'm going to focus on maintenance because I personally prefer the shell model. So we've got our maintenance top level header, and then our software that we use, hardware, liveware, and environment. Remember that software does not mean computer software in the shell model. It means it can mean things like manuals as well. Okay, to create a new hazard area, these bits in gray, we'll click on the top right here. We'll say 5, maintenance personnel. Now I know this comes under liveware, but I'm going to use it as an example. And I'll say this is going to go under point 4, maintenance, and then create. I see I've misspelled personnel as well. Once you've created that, you'll see it appear here. And I've just realized that I've made that mistake and that it comes under liveware. So I'll right click on it, and I can either rename it to repurpose that or set it as inactive. And that's going to remove it from the list as we see it here. You'll note that when I right clicked on that, we had one more thing called hazard area permissions. I'll come back to the risks later on. And here we can see grouped by access template what people can do in this part of the hazard area, of the hazard and risk register. So as it stands, our engineers cannot see this part of the hazard and risk register at all. And it would be a good idea for them to see that, so we'll grant them read access. Our pilots don't necessarily need to see it, but our quality and safety manager probably do. In fact, they would be the ones who manage this, so they would need read and write access. Our default access should not have it, but our administrator can. So once I update that, then those personnel will be able to see and or change things here in the hazard and risk register. Right, so once we've populated our hazard areas, again the parts in grey, we can start creating hazards. Now, the definitions of hazards and risks are quite complicated. Well, not complicated, but they can be difficult to apply to an actual operating environment. A hazard is an action or a condition that can lead to adverse consequences, and the risks would be the consequences that action could lead to. Using an example, if you have a flower pot on a windowsill, that is hazardous because it could be knocked over and fall to the ground. So knocking it off the windowsill would be your risk. You'll note that when we create a hazard, as I will do now, I'm going to put one under destinations because I think this is a useful way to show you how this could be used. I'm going to say operating at Cape Town. I'll just put in a description. Again, this can be anything you like, it's plain text, so whatever makes the most sense for you. And I'll create that. You'll see that under destinations, we've had our new hazard pop up. We've got who it was reported by and when. At this time, we have no risks associated, no specific risks. However, we can link safety reports to this hazard. So in this case, it would probably be a flight occurrence report. And I'm just going to choose that one. And once I've done that, the screen will refresh and I'll have a hyperlink to go and see that report. Here I can review the details. Okay, then we have hazard documents and hazard actions. We do not recommend populating these two directly, and I will show you why. Right, so once you've created your hazard, you need to put in the risks that are associated with that hazard. In this case, I'm going to say wake turbulence. Heavy aircraft operate out of Cape Town, such as the 747. And as I've experienced personally, and many other people who operate light aircraft out of Cape Town have, getting caught in the wake turbulence of a 747 when you're in a light Cessna is not a good experience. So again, you can make this as descriptive or as vague as you like. It depends what purpose you are using. The likelihood of this is remote. You should have good separation provided by air traffic control, but the consequences can be moderate to major, so I'm going to choose major. which gives us a risk index of extreme as per our table that we set up earlier. Adequacy of existing controls. We're just creating this risk so that we may not have anything in place to combat this. I'm going to say inadequate, because obviously we don't want to operate with an extreme risk level. A risk priority is just a way of cataloging what needs to be addressed first. And then our risk owners. The risk owner is the person who's responsible for reviewing this risk. And we'll come to that, what that means shortly. I'm going to choose Sarah. As we saw earlier, we can associate equipment from our equipment register. In this case, I don't think it applies, so I'm just going to click Create. Now that I've created that risk, you'll see it pops up in a tab here, and it is color-coded to the risk index. So on our site, extreme is red. If I go and look somewhere else, such as tools here, this one is yellow because it has a lower risk index. Last reviewed, medium. Okay, let's go back to Cape Town. As you can see, at this time we have an initial risk. We have initial because that can be reviewed based on how effective the controls we implement are. The next tab we have is controls, and here we can document what we're doing to mitigate this risk. In this case, ATC traffic separation is in place. Oh, I've misspelled that. And our status is in effect. But we're still using we still have an extreme risk, which means that this is probably not enough for us, so we'll have to think up some other controls, such as landing upwind of heavy aircraft touchdown points. Now this is good practice when you're flying, and your pilots may know that, but if you do not have that documented, then it is not a control that you are using. So we'll call that proposed. Again, this is a rich text editor here, so you can use bullet points, bold, underline, different font sizes, and different colors and highlighting. So there are two controls. We could put more in, but I'm not going to waste our time doing that. Our next tab is Risk Review. This is probably the most critical tab in the entire hazard and risk register, because this is where you specify how often you need to revisit this risk and decide whether the controls that you have implemented or proposed are effective. So I'll edit that and say we need to look at this risk every 3 months. So quarterly, 4 times a year. What this is going to do is it's going to prompt the risk owner or owners to come and review this risk when they log into the system. Once I come here, I can add a new risk review and say it's going to be extremely improbable because our controls are working for us, and the consequences will be moderate again because our controls have mitigated this risk. It's now going to be a medium risk. Let's say encounters with wake turbulence have not been reported in the last 3 months. New procedures seem to be effective. So again, this is just an example. If you prefer to go into more detail or less detail, that's entirely up to you. I will click Insert. And so, 3 months from this date, Sarah, who is our risk owner, will be notified that she needs to come and have another look at what we're doing over here. As you can see, our color has changed to yellow, which is our medium risk color. And on the risk details page, we have our latest reviewed risk. So you have documented evidence that you have identified a risk and then mitigated it. Here under risk documents, you can attach files. These can be anything at all, pictures, procedures, PDF, Word, anything at all. And we'll put in a description like so. And then here under risk actions, we can ask people to take action to mitigate the risk. So I'm going to say that this chap in operations, Fred, he needs to add something to our course category is also a bit of a mess on the demo site because people have been playing with it for many years. But this is the way to categorize your actions, both in the hazard and risk register, in safety reporting, in auditing, and in the task register, which we'll look at shortly. And I'll say to Fred that he needs to document our new procedures regarding wake turbulence in the appendix of the operations manual. I can create that. So this is where our recommendation that you do not create actions under the hazard comes in, because all of the risk actions from all of the risks associated with that hazard will automatically populate this list, which is a way to get an overview of what you are doing about this. I have an example down here under career, under logistical support. We have two risks, hijack and late arrivals. Under each risk, we have an action. And under hazard actions, we can see both of them. Okay, coming back to Cape Town. In order to create a second risk underneath this hazard, you would simply create new risk again. Okay, we have one more thing to show you here under hazard, the hazard areas. You can right-click here and click Display All Hazard Area Risks, which will generate a little printout for you detailing the risks underneath the underneath each hazard. So here are our destinations, the individual hazards, the risks associated with those hazards. So in this case, it would be the issues that we face at each of the airfields that we operate at, a description of what these are, our initial risk, our priority, how urgent we need to address it, the controls we have in place, the latest reviewed risk, who reviewed it, and who is responsible for reviewing it. A couple more controls for you. If you have a standard set of risks associated with operating at airfields, we can right-click here and copy a hazard, and you can choose what you want to bring across. So in this case, we can do it with risk details and risk controls. And we are going to copy it to destinations. There are our duplicates, and now we can come here and rename this one and call it FAR, or Tambo International Airport. And again, our wake turbulence risk would be the same because we're operating around heavy aircraft. One more thing, we can also copy risks up here or remove them. So if you copy a hazard and you find that some of the risks are actually not applicable, you can right-click up there and remove it. I just needed to refresh to get that to show FAOR. So again, as you can see, the taxonomy can be somewhat difficult to figure out. I quite like what we have done here, splitting it up into various sections of the company. But it's not to say that that is a right or a wrong way to do it. It's just what we've chosen to do. Now, the next thing I have to show you is the task register. The task register is for management of change. It allows us, its use requires the population of the hazard and risk register, and I'll show you why. First things first, at the top right, we have a filter to show task status. These I will explain shortly, and then list non-active tasks. So these would be tasks that have been completed. We're going to go and add a task. And once we do so, we'll say we're opening an office at OR Tambo. New FBO and dispatch at FAOR. The effective period, as in when we are going to be doing this task. Two days, we're super speedy here. Our location, our crew, which aircraft type is going to be associated with this task. So we have an NA in case this does not apply to an aircraft. Activity, what we're going to be doing, construction of new office, opening of AMO hangar, etc., etc. Our objectives, our procedure list. So you type it in here. We can add or remove equipment, and the conclusion of the task. As you can see, you can have several different procedures that you're going to associate with this task. And our objective to create a facility that complies with occupational health and safety and SACAA regulations. I'm going to include some tool cabinets and computers and ground power units, and click update there. Our task reviewer is the person who would need to come and say that yes, this task has been documented well. And now the most important part is here on the right. This is where we start bringing in the risks and controls that we have documented in our hazard and risk register. So I'm going to say this includes maintenance equipment because we're creating an AMO or a line station. You can include that as well. We'll search for aircrew, do AVSEC, and I think that's probably good enough for an example. Once we're happy with all of that, we'll click Create. Now we have associated all of these specific hazards with this task, And now under Task Hazard Risks, we have the risks and controls associated with those hazards. I see I've not done a very good job because I have not pulled in any that have been properly populated. So let's do that, and let's do courier as well. So now I've got something in there. We'll update it, and then have another look, and that's better. So I'll click print on the top right there, and we can have a better look at this. As you can see, the same as we saw previously in the hazard and risk register, we have our hazard, our risk, description of the risk, our initial risk index, our priority, how urgently we need to address it, our controls, our latest reviewed risk, who reviewed it, and who's responsible for maintaining or reviewing that risk, and the controls. And then finally, we have some task actions, as we've seen before. So you can add an action, and remember that we have disabled setting risk index per task in the hazard and risk register setup. So I can give myself a task to be done by that date, say it's a suggested improvement, and purchase. So again, these need to be cleaned up somewhat. New computerized tool cabinets for AMO Hangar 1. And then that person, in this case myself, can come back and respond to it here by clicking on that two-page thing. Note that I'm able to change the status of this action because I'm the requestor. However, if you assign it to someone else, they will not be able to change the status or the due date. Once we're done, we're happy with, we've populated this, we've completed our actions, we can then go and request review. Whoever has been designated as task reviewer will now get a notification to say that they need to come here, check the details of the task, and sign off. As you can see, our analysis was completed today, and this will be updated to show when the review done by Rob was completed as well. Any tasks, actions, risk actions that you have created here in the hazard and risk register will show up in the action register here under safety, the spider web. Let me clear those filters. And here's the one that I just created. So that's task 9, action 2. If you or your company or your team require any assistance with setting up or maintaining your hazard and risk register, please do not hesitate to get in contact with us at help@cairnaviation.com. We'd be more than happy to be of assistance. Thank you for watching our webinar, and I hope you have a great day.